All right, friends and family, my name is John Nushemeza. Welcome to the Counter Revolution podcast. The Counter Revolution podcast is dedicated to exploring the meaning of education, a Christian philosophy of education, and why every Christian should have an explicitly and unapologetically Christian philosophy of education. We believe that education is discipleship and missional. All education is. Therefore, we believe education is the job of the parents. All education, formal and spiritual, is the job of the family first and foremost, in the local church, but not the government, according to the Bible. Our mission, then, is to reclaim and reform all education to the church and to restore her as to her rightful place as foundation and pillar of truth. All right, folks, this time around, I am excited to be talking to a powerful, powerful woman of God. Her name is Diane Douglas, and she is the former superintendent for the public schools in Arizona. Diane Douglas, according to her bio at Public School Exit, where she's an advisor, Diane Douglas has always been passionate about the American education system and has been actively involved in Arizona's education landscape for over 25 years. Her interest started with her daughter's education and has continued with her grandson. She believes that God entrusts children to parents and not to the government bureaucracies, no matter how well intended. Advocating and protecting parents' right to direct the education of their children has been one of her highest priorities throughout her years of service. As the leader of the Arizona Department of Education, former Superintendent Douglas was devoted to improving education in Arizona so that all Arizona's children have the opportunity to achieve their goals in life and contribute as successful American citizen. She believes that the only way to accomplish this goal is to return education to its original purpose, the acquisition of knowledge through a classical education. To this end, she attempted during her tenure to bring Hillsdale Barney charter school standards to all the Arizona schools. She has now turned her efforts to sounding the alarm about the government controlled, politically correct indoctrination of public schools and helping parents find their true educational alternatives for their children. To that end, Ms. Douglas now serves on the Educational Advisory Board of Public School Exit. Ms. Diane Douglas wrote a foreword to the new book here um, by Alex Newman here, which is called Indoctrinating Our Children to Death: Government Schools War on Faith, Family, and Freedom, and How to Stop It. In her foreword, Ms. Douglas says something that gripped me, which is why I spoke to Alex Newman and asked to speak to her on my podcast. So, this conversation you're about to hear was sparked by her foreword in this very important book written by Alex Newman. Without further ado, I present to you my conversation with Diane Douglas. Okay, so Mrs. Diane Douglas, welcome to the Counter Revolution podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, John.
Thank you again. I want to thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I am so blessed to have crossed paths with Alex Newman, and he is basically the reason why we're doing this today.
Well, and I second that motion. Alex is great. I'm privileged to be able to work with him.
Yeah. Okay, so let's not waste too much time then. I'm interested first to know about you personally. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know you. I'm pretty sure of it. At least the people over there in Arizona. But can you?
People don't believe what you read about me.
Yeah, well, when you're in politics like that, I'm sure there's all kinds of falsehood written about you. So can you just talk a little bit about you and your background, and kind of how you came you rose up, I guess, to be a superintendent of public schools in Arizona?
Yep, the
Yeah,
official title is Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction. I think it's the longest elected title in
yeah,
Arizona. But
yeah.
my journey began even before my daughter was in school herself when a
Mhm.
friend asked me to help her find out why her daughter, who'd gotten B's and C's all year long, was being held back by the school district to repeat second grade. So
Yeah,
I had what I call my three epiphany moments. That one taught me about outcome based education. And then another one was when my daughter was in kindergarten and she was taught to read in her district at the time with very explicit phonics instruction. And all
yeah,
of a sudden, I realized why I hated reading all through my school days because that was not how I was taught to read. And then
yeah,
there was another one when she was in about second grade. It was another outcome based education thing. All the kids in school were getting really high grades. And how
right,
I'm a financial analyst in another life. How can that be? They're cooking the books for all the kids to have such a B average or higher. Just didn't make sense. So
yeah,
that got me on the path studying education and looking into I have, you can't see them behind me, two bookshelves full of education books. And I just started
yeah,
learning and reading and studying. I volunteered at my daughter's school back in the day when we were allowed to volunteer in the classrooms. And I did that for years. I was on the PTSA. I was an officer on our PTSA, Parent Teacher Student Association,
yeah,
and ended up by the time my daughter got ready to graduate high school, some things happened in our district that I didn't like and I was unhappy about. So I decided to run for our school board. So I served 8 years. It's the Peoria Unified School District here in Arizona. At the time, I think we were the third largest district in the state,
right,
maybe fourth. And so I ran for school board. I was elected and served from 2005 to 2012, and I was the board president in 2008 and 2009. And then I decided not to run for a third term. One term is hard work on a school board, two terms is good, three terms is okay, but you don't stay longer than three terms, in my opinion.
yeah,
You start doing it for the wrong reason. So after I left the school board in 2010 is when the federal Common Core curriculum, they started adopting that, and it was adopted here in our state. The more I learned about it, the less I liked it and was very concerned about it. So after I got off the school board, I started going around to political meetings and talking about Common Core and warning parents about what it is and what it's going to do to education. And
mm,
so everywhere I went, people would say, "You need to run for superintendent." And I said, "No, thank you, not me. I've had enough politics. I don't want to get in it anymore." Until literally I went to church one day and God called me to run for the office. And I thought I won the office against huge odds. I ran in the Republican primary against a 30-year politician who'd never lost an election. He was the incumbent in the office,
yeah,
and I won that by 16 percentage points. Then I won the general election against the Democrat only by about a percentage point, a little over a percentage point, but after having been outspent 10 to 1 in money
Oh
in the
wow.
campaign. So it was truly a miracle. I know I really shouldn't have won, but it was God's will for me. And I thought it was His will to help me finally fix education. But I came to realize that He put me in that office to prove to me our government schools can't be fixed. They're doing exactly what they were created to do. And
Yeah.
so after leaving office, I had the privilege of, I had met Alex when he had come to Arizona to do a presentation for us. And we stayed in touch and they invited me to join Public School Exit. And I'm honored to be on that board because we've got to get our kids out of government schools.
Wow. I mean, as I said, I have been kind of following Alex Newman online for some time now. He is such an inspiration for me to be on this trajectory. Um, so the way my story kind of turned out, since maybe about 10 years ago. Well, growing up, I was always um, into politics because I was born in Rwanda, and then because of political things, people started killing each other. We left, moved to Zambia, so I was always kind of alert to politics. Um, and then when 10 years ago, basically, I growing up in church, I had left and went the other way. 10 years ago, I came back home, and then soon after, I started kind of paying back attention to what was going on politically. Um, but in 2020, I was like shocked to see how quickly um, people were able to follow directions like sheep. Like basically they've been trained to follow orders. It was weird to watch. It's like God basically opened my eyes to see all these kids, little kids, holding signs, adults, people going in the streets, and then there was confusion. Now these things were always there. I just had never seen it before. But also in 2020, it kind of went on a spike. It just spiked really high for most of us to finally wake up. Um, I started asking questions. There's gotta be a way they were able to do this. There's gotta be a way someone was able to train the masses, like everyone almost, to be able to just follow orders like that, and be able to have this uh, unbelievable, um, just how they were being deceived almost on the spot. The news came out to be, I don't know. It was something that to me was obviously spiritual to most of us that are able to accept it. But I realized there had to be someone, a way that the government or the enemies of God, somebody was able to deceive entire generations. And then I stumbled on Alex Newman's material. So this is how I started paying closer attention to Alex Newman. Is I He gave me the answer that I was looking. And then I found out there was other people, a whole lot of other people that were in the same vein. So when you say that the government schools are doing exactly what they were designed to do, that's something that kind of fell on me before I realized what it was. Um, Now, there's another lady in North Carolina who recently won the Republican nomination for school superintendent over there. and they labeled her. Some big newspapers came out and said she is an existential threat to public school. Is that a title that is that a title that you would take with great honor, or what do you think about that title?
You know, I wasn't in office very long, and the battles with it was a Republican governor here in Arizona, and the battles started right away. And a gentleman who became a friend of mine, who was actually in the legislature at the time, as
Uh,
the governor and I are going through battles, he sent me a text that I still have saved on my phone today, and he said, Superintendent Douglas, my daddy always said, you're known just as well by your friends as you are by your enemies. Keep going.
uh. Yeah, that's good advice.
Most people don't realize. I mean, I was talking to parents about the threat of Common Core, and to most of the parents, they thought that was new. This is a new horrible thing from the federal government, and they don't understand the history of education, and they don't
Yeah,
understand the history of how our government schooling. I don't call it public education anymore. I call it government schooling, because
schooling.
that's what
Yeah,
it is. It's not about education. And to anybody, I hope you don't mind I say this, if anybody that wants to learn it short, sweet, and to the point, get Alex Newman's new book, Indoctrinating Our Children to
yeah,
Death. I mean, the whole history is in there. When we started as a country, children were either homeschooled or schooled in church or
yeah,
schooled by small tutoring groups. That was how, and the purpose was to teach them to read so they could read the Bible and be closer
yeah,
to God. That was the reason.
yeah,
And once you learn how to read, and this is what terrifies our school system now, teach a child to read, teach them grammar to understand the English language, and teach them basic arithmetic. And the reality is, they never need a teacher again. All they need is self motivation to be able to study and keep advancing their knowledge.
yeah. That's the, I guess, the foundation, um, in what some call classical education, I guess, or the trivium. Yeah. Oh, I don't mind at all. This is the book right here. This is basically, this is why you and I are talking today. Is because you wrote the foreword to, I will say, one of the most important books, if not the most important book that will come out this year. Um,
Keep telling people if they, and I have it here too. I keep
yeah,
telling parents and everybody, if they want to learn what I took 20 and 25 years to learn, pick up
yeah,
this book, and it's short, sweet, to the point, and you can understand what's the problem. And if you look at, some of our adversaries around the world, I mean, Hitler, what did he do
yeah,
first? He took over the children. Red China, what did they do? They took over the education of the children. Russia,
yeah,
USSR, I should say. They all get the children first. And once you get the children, all the things we're battling today, in my opinion, lay at the feet of K 12 education and how we've been educating our children. I went to school a long time ago. I tell people, I tease, a million years ago. And now that I know what I know, I can see where it was even coming into the schools back then.
yeah, yeah. I mean, people have been warning. Basically, even at the whenever they started proposing such a thing as government school, there was always spirit filled people that said that's not a good idea.
Mhm.
Don't do that. They told the church, do not go along with that. But somehow we did, and here we are today. I believe a lot of it was done, and is still being done today, out of convenience. If people would really be um,
Mhm.
honest, it's out of convenience. It's the easy thing to do. You can hand your kids over. Don't have to worry about them at least for a good number of hours, and So,
Well,
but yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, not to interrupt you, but I mean, I remember the day, I'm old enough, when we told our women it's not the quantity of time you spend with your children, it's the quality of time. So go out and get a job. And it's more important that you be working that you be in a, than that you be at home raising your children. And that's crazy. Our
Right.
children need their parents and they need time with them. And I don't care if it's a stay at home mom or a stay at home dad, but they need time with their families, not an hour or two before they go to bed after school.
Yeah, and but when you think about it, the alternative is you're having the government pretty much co-parent with you. The I've been looking into,
They don't even believe the
yeah,
children are the parents anymore. They believe they belong to the government.
right, exactly. Um, I was looking into social and emotional learning,
Oh my goodness.
and I mean, basically, the government is telling parents, "Hey, you don't have to worry about teaching your kids anything." And this is obvious, has always been obvious, but it's now that they're now starting to come. So the things that people like John Dewey and all these other people were doing undercover, because they could never say it out loud then, the country was too Christian for them to say those things out loud. Now they are saying it out loud because they can. Now they can. They've secularized enough of the people to be able to do it out on Front Street. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I want to take us back a little bit. So you become superintendent of the schools over there in Arizona. What? How was that like? I mean, I imagine that was probably one of the hardest jobs in the world, to have to deal with all kinds of, yeah. How was it for as a Christian, as a spirit-filled Christian working in that world? How was it?
Well, I have to say to people, I mean, being an elected official at that level, it's the fifth highest elected office in the state of Arizona. I mean,
Mhm.
that's an honor and privilege. There's no
Yeah.
doubt about it. It was an honor to serve, but it was a tough 4 years. When we were running, when I was running for the office, I did not run on a slate with the gentleman that was running for governor on the Republican side. But
Mhm.
we were at a lot of events together, and one of the big issues that was in 2014 was Common Core, and that our state had adopted it. So we'd
Right.
be at events together, and I'd be talking about Common Core, and people would ask our gubernatorial candidate, where do you stand on Common Core? Oh, we're going to get rid of it. It's no good. It's no good. Well, I wasn't in office less than 3 weeks when I did not get a call from the governor. I want to be clear about that. But it was from an emissary of the governor. And
Mhm.
basically, it wasn't a call to me, it was a call to my chief of staff, but he had me listen in, so I heard it. And I'll clean up the language from the emissary. But basically, we were told Common Core was cute. That's not the word he used during the election. But the campaign is over and Common Core isn't going anywhere. And we
Yeah.
basically fought about it for several years. I was able to, um, it was in March of 2015, first 3 months in office, I actually went to Washington, D.C., because the copyright for Common Core was held by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. And that's
Mhm.
all the heads of education across the 50 states plus some territories. I went to Washington and I was able to get Arizona a release from the copyright that basically said we can now do whatever we want with our standards. While
Yeah.
I was in Washington doing that, the governor went to the State Board of Ed and told them They can modify it, they can make revisions, but they cannot replace it with any other standards. There were some states, California had good standards at the time, Texas had good standards, Massachusetts had good independent standards outside of Common Core. And he said, no,
Mm.
you can't replace them with any of those, no matter how good they are. I did was able to get the state board in October of 2015 to vote 6-2, I think the number was, with a couple of board members missing, to that Common Core would no longer be the official standards of Arizona, but yet they
Wow.
would not pick any other standards to replace them. They would only revise the ones we had. So we got some good things done. We got stronger explicit phonics in the standards. We got uh, math fluency. For people not familiar with that term, that's when you memorize your addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division tables rather than what they do now with kids is teach them to recalculate the same problem every time. You know,
Yeah.
no, 2 plus 2 equals 4. Sit down with a paper and have to count it out, which you're never going to be successful in math doing that.
Right.
They had some awful, awful language arts reading materials in it. Most of it in the high school levels was reading manuals and things like that rather than good classical literature. We made changes like that. So you can argue, I think we changed over 40% of the, I can't remember which one, 40% of, I think, the English language arts standards and
Yeah.
well over 30% of the math, or it could be vice versa. So when you change things that much, is it technically still Common Core? We can argue yes or no, it is. But one of the things in Arizona, and it may be this way in other states, as the elected superintendent, my job was to run the Department of Education to make sure the money got out properly to all our different school districts and do audits and make sure it was spent. But the elected superintendent was just a member of the State Board of Ed, which is basically an appointed board. And that's the board that sets policy. So it's not the person that the citizens of Arizona have chosen to oversee education. It's really the appointed people that make the decisions.
Yeah. The administrators.
Nah, they're even worse than administrators.
Oh
I
my
mean, the
goodness.
State Board of Ed in our state, six of the 11, I believe there's 11 positions on it now. Six of them, the majority of them, are what I call educrats. You know, a
Oh wow.
superintendent of a high school district, community college administrator, university administrator, a charter school administrator. They're all people that are deep involved in education, and they're the people that, in my opinion, are causing the problems.
Yeah. Now, so my understanding is that Common Core was an Obama administration thing. That, in my understanding, a lot of money was attached to it. Is that was that true?
Yeah, it's interesting because here in Arizona, our then governor and then superintendent back in 2010,
Mm.
who the gentleman that was superintendent in 2010 is now back in office again. He was reelected, interestingly enough. Um, it was brought into the states had to, in order to be not considered, they'd be considered for the Obama money was called the Race to the Top grant.
Yeah.
In order to be considered for that, they had to say that we would adopt Common Core. In my opinion, the way Common Core was adopted in Arizona was illegal because, let me say, unlawful rather than
Yeah.
illegal, because in January of 2010, our governor and our superintendent of public instruction signed a Race to the Top application that guaranteed the federal government that Common Core would become the official standards of the state of Arizona, adopted by a vote of the State Board of Ed in June of 2010. Well, that's mandating how an elected board votes. You're not allowed to do that. That's an
Yeah.
open meeting law violation under the law. but they did it nonetheless. If I remember correctly, they they wanted to apply for it because the race to the top grant could be as much as, I think it was it 250 million, I think, were some of the top grants that they gave out. The federal
Mm.
government gave out for adopting Common Core and winning the grant. Well, they were looking, oh boy, we're going to get a Common Core. We'll get $250 million, assuming, I'm sure I'm correct about that number, but forgive me if I'm wrong. Anyway, in Arizona, we ended up getting 25 million. And half of it, if I remember correctly, went county, um, to the counties. Very little of it went to help the schools. Very,
Yeah.
very little. And so
Wow.
we and then we ended up, and they stopped tracking it because we'd hoped to get 250 million. We got 25 million. The state was tracking the cost of implementing Common Core, the new books that school districts had to buy, and teacher training, and all the things that go along with the new curriculum. And they stopped counting at 300 million to implement it in the state of Arizona. And that hadn't even taken any of the technology into account yet that needed to be bought. So it was a huge boondoggle, and it's not good for our kids.
Yeah. So, um, what what about the unions? How are the unions on that level? How do you deal with them? What uh how is that business handled on that level?
Arizona is a right to work state, so they
Yeah.
cannot mandate any teacher join a union. You know, they
Okay.
can voluntarily do so. Um, some of the districts have what they call meet and confer, where the unions are actually accepted by the governing board and actually become part of the negotiations of
Mhm.
district contracts and teacher contracts and things. In
Yeah.
the district that I was on the school board, the union was never given those rights. So they could have not a seat at the negotiating table, but they could have a meeting with the superintendent and administration to say these are some of the things we'd like to see in the contract, but they had no formal way to push it. Now, one of the big problems for me when I was in superintendent, the last year I was in office, we had a strike. Now, Arizona teachers can't strike. It's not permitted. Government workers, because it's a right to work state, cannot walk off the job, but yet
Oh wow.
60,000 of our teachers did. I was out there prior to that happening doing interviews and things. Now, our governor had already promised them a 20% increase by the year 2020, and this is in 2018. So, over 2 years' time, they would
Mhm.
get a 20% increase. I guarantee you nobody else in Arizona was getting those kind of raises. But so he made that promise, and yet they walked off the job anyway because they claimed they didn't believe him, and basically closed down schools for several weeks before they went back to work. And you know, before they walked out, I tried to get as many interviews on the media as I could, and I told them, don't walk out. You know, you
Yeah.
didn't promise this raise. Please stay on the job. And if your school closes, because the school boards were saying, well, we're just going to close the schools, I said, send a letter to my department. Tell your administration that you have no intention of walking off the job. You were going to come into work, because there could have been consequences afterwards. In my opinion, they should have all been held responsible with, at the bare minimum, a letter of censure against their certificate for walking out on their jobs. And I
Right.
have to tell you honestly, John, although I did run for reelection, after they walked out on our children, I have a hard time feeling the same about the profession since then.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. I mean, I recently posted on Facebook. Um, in my view, um, government schools or
uh, whatever we call it, public education or public whatever you call it, um, is to me it's set up for the adults primarily. It's not really set up for the children. When you bring it closer, it looks like it's really in every way it's set up for the adults that want a job, that want to teach. It's a job for them. The adults that want to put up their kids so they can go do some other job. It's a doubt for the politicians to use the children as some sort of pawn. It's a job for the elites to
Mhm.
create and educate the children
To
that will
control.
grow up to be foot soldiers in their sick Game of Thrones. It's to me, it's just all designed for the adults.
And
Um,
even
mhm,
not to pick on the parents, but it's designed to be long hours during the day so the moms or dads can go out to work so we can have two income families paying taxes to the government.
yeah,
And another thing I learned, that I was involved in politics for quite a while before I was elected superintendent. So I was not politically naive. But one of the things that really surprised me when I got down to Phoenix as the superintendent, and I came to realize, is that neither side of the aisle really wants to fix education. The
right,
people on the left, they want it, it's a jobs program for the adults. I agree with you, 100% on that. But the left wants it to make little social media is not the right word. Social activists is the word I
yes,
want for their causes to get out, protest. Oh my goodness, we had Earth Day again the other day on Lenin's birthday. But the right, not all of them, but predominantly, the right wants little worker bees, and they want the school system to train
yeah,
kids in the current jobs that are needed and necessary. So they don't want things changed. The one thing that used to make me crazy when I go to conferences that industry was involved in, the hiring right, is they would call our children human capital.
yeah,
How disgusting.
yeah. That's insane, but it makes sense in their worldview. It makes perfect sense because that's all they are. So okay, so you go into this business. You're fired up. You're going to change. You're going to make an impact. I imagine, like most well-meaning Christians, you believe the system can work. We just have to fix it. Just need someone to go in there and do the right things to fix it up and reform it, and it should be able to be fixed. What did you find?
No, it can't be fixed. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. To basically change America. The way I say it is to separate children from their families, from our country, and from our God. And
Yeah,
it's just, I used to work so hard at it, and I say God put me in that office to prove to me it can't be fixed. I tell people he hit me over the head with a 2x4 to, Diane, wake up.
yeah,
One of the reasons I worked so hard up until that point, until I learned differently, was because I always felt there's too many kids in the government system that we can't give up on it. If we give up on it, we're going to lose our country.
yeah,
Well, John, honestly, if we keep supporting it and staying with it, we are going to lose our country. You don't have to look
yeah,
further. Look at Nazi Germany. Look at communist China. Look at the USSR. That's how they were able to do the things they were doing. And they had government school systems.
well, I hate to say it, and I love this country. From my accent, you can tell that I'm an immigrant. I wasn't born here. I've been here for 18 years. Um, my wife is American. My children, we have two girls, 3 and 1.
You know,
Um,
that are not
and
going to go to government schools, right?
they they uh they will not if I have anything to do with it. They won't. Um, I will stay home and educate them if I have to. But my wife and I have a plan to homeschool them.
Right.
But when I look around, um, I I have to say things are pretty bad right now. All you have to see is the ones that are in college right now in these institutions of higher education or whatever, that are all basically just communist centers now, Marxist uh, camps. Um, right now, we're looking at Columbia University imploding, but that's been the case since the 60s. I don't see how anybody can be surprised at Columbia University because Columbia University is probably single-handedly responsible for the destruction of this country. The poison that's been able to be pushed out of that institution alone. Um,
Well, I had always said, and I still say to this day, if when I was in office or even now, if God had given me a magic wand and said to me, Diane, but you can only change one thing about the education system with that wish or that wand, what would it be? No doubt in my mind, I would abolish the colleges of education
yeah,
because even our private schools hire the teachers that come from the colleges of education and they're socialist indoctrination centers.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's amazing to watch. Which as a Christian, one of the things that puzzles me is why it's hard for Christians to get it. Why do you think it's hard for Christians and pastors and just your average evangelical to accept reality for what it is?
That's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of it, in part, there's a whole bunch of different reasons. I mean, number one, it's been referred to for 100 years, 150 years now, public education. That sounds like a very wonderful thing to have. Oh, we're going to have public education. That's going to be a great thing for our kids to make sure, they get well educated. Although our reading levels, our literacy levels were much better back before the government school system than they are
Yeah,
now. Part of it is a lot of our teachers are Christians. I don't can't speak for around the country, but I know even here in Arizona, a lot of them are Christians. So a lot of churches don't want to say anything about the schools and what's going on in the schools because it'll upset their parishioners who are working in the schools. It can
yeah,
be part of that. The churches looked at it. I mean, they were very involved in education back in colonial times. If it wasn't homeschooled, then it was primarily at your city, your
church.
town's church or your village's church, whatever it might be. But then they created this government schooling system, and the churches thought they didn't have to do it anymore because and I can't think who it is. There's a gentleman from way back, even, before John Dewey's day. And he said, what do these people think they're going to do with their churches 1 or 2 days a week, in raining the Holy Spirit, the Bible studies into our children when we have them 5 days a week for 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah, that was not Frederick Getz. Alex Newman has him in the book. I forgot where, but he has him pretty much. He's talking about humanism, and he said that education is a school of humanism.
Yes, it is. That is,
Um,
humanism has been declared a religion by the courts, and it is the official religion of government schooling.
yep. So the gentleman that you're talking about, if I can find the quote, is um, his last name is Potts.
I was going to say
Charles Potter. Charles Potter, a fellow signer of the Human Manifesto and Dewey's associate, spelled out explicitly what a few Americans were willing to see or understand at the time. He says, quote, education is thus a most powerful ally of humanism, and every public school is a school of humanism. And
mhm,
then down further, he says, what can theistic Sunday school meeting for an hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children do to the do to stem the tide of a 5-day program of humanistic teaching?
exactly. Thank you for finding that.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the most sobering quotes I've ever read in my view, and one that should convince every parent and every pastor to yank their children out of public school, because these are the fathers of public education.
Right.
Even, yeah, even secular teachers and educators, I guess, would say the same. John Dewey was is the father of modern public education. Now, John Dewey was an atheist who hated God and was a communist, was in favor of communism, wanted to change, fundamentally transform the American society from a Christian nation, a Christian country, basically, a population of majority Christians, to a secular humanist country, a godless nation, basically.
And you made an interesting point before when you mentioned John Dewey, which is spot on. They did it very quietly, very under the radar, because they knew if Americans knew what they were doing and why they were doing it, their things would have broken loose. They would have never been able to get away with it. But they said it's going to be very, very slow, so people don't even notice it. It's like the old adage: "How do you boil a frog? A little bit at a time."
Yeah,
And one of the things that's frustrating to me, you know, it's public education, and I hang with a pretty conservative crowd, out here in Arizona, and so many times, not faulting my conservatives, but so many times I hear them lamenting all the government handouts, the food stamps, the welfare, all the different things that are, and they use the term government handouts, and I say to them, don't you realize government schooling is nothing else but another government handout? You're responsible for educating your children, not the government.
that is, I haven't thought about it quite like that, but that is, oh my goodness, that's deep. I mean, it's free. Most people send their children there because it's free.
Hmm.
Even the ones that don't pay property taxes, they get to send their kids to school, and the property people that own properties pay for those kids to go to for everyone else's kids to go to school. A lot of people who pay taxes, a lot, not all the time, but in some cases, they actually don't even send their kids to the to the public schools. So it is a welfare program.
I don't know if the numbers are still the same, but back when I was on the school board, um, they said only about a third of our tax-paying citizens in that school district actually had children that could be sent. Two-thirds of the people who were footing the tax bill didn't have
Yeah.
kids to go to school. They'd either
Right.
grown or they didn't have children yet, or whatever the case may be. Senior citizens,
Yeah. Yeah. And
probably not.
some
Probably not.
people have two kids. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's probably not that much different now because our young adults are having less and less children all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And you can have two children. Um, and be paying taxes, I guess. And next door, they might have three or four children. So your taxes are not only paying for your children, they're paying for their five children. I mean, I've never heard that before. That's perfect. It is a government handout.
Hmm.
It's the worst one of the government handouts because it cripples an entire nation uh, 30, 40 years from now. It's the worst exchange possible. So okay, so then now you've seen the light in the book, and the reason why I really, after I read your forward to this book, I knew I had to ask to see to meet you because I have to say this gripped my heart. I, I I have heard this before. I've heard a lot of people, but most people don't say it like you did, and they've never had the kind of similar background as yours to get kind of I guess epiphany, if you will, to say, "Wow, I think God brought me here to actually show me, so I can go back and tell others the reality of the situation." So you say the reality is that our government schools are not broken. They're doing exactly what they were designed to do, achieving ends for which they were originally intended, separating children from God and family. The system is trying to make them dependent on the socialist government that the system itself, as this book proves, was always intended to produce. And then further down, you go on to say, and while I respect, this is what gripped my heart, and while I respect those who wish to follow my path into school board service, I believe your time, money, and energy will be better spent replacing the system. Encourage your pastor to open a church based school, homeschool your children, or create a neighborhood schooling group, or support private school tuition or any alternative that is not funded by tax dollars under the control of the government. That is, oh my goodness. When I read that, my passion is to encourage pastors to really look into this, to encourage Christians to see this as our pretty much primary and most important job
Hmm.
that we have today. So how can what is your advice to pastors and Christians who have maybe the means or the platforms to get this message out? What is your in addition, obviously, to what I just wrote, what else can you say to that?
Well, if I can give a shameless plug for Public School Exit, and they can go on publicschoolexit.com. It's all one
Mhm.
word. I mean,
Yes.
we have a consulting service. We will help them, show them there are so many ways pastors could set up a school in their church, that they can do it either with their own people, they can rent out their facilities. I mean, you think about it, most churches, their buildings sit empty all week long.
Yeah.
And so they could easily set up a facility there. And we'll help them do that. We'll show them the different alternatives, the different ways that they can. So publicschoolexit.com. Um, they parents, they could lend some of the room to parents. We tell parents, because so many say to me, oh, I could never homeschool, I don't have the time. Well, I know a lot of working parents that do
Yeah.
homeschool, and they find a way to do it because it's just that important. But even if you can't do it by yourself, you can set up little pods, and maybe one mom can take one day or a dad can take another day. You can find someone. We need to get our good teachers out of the government school system. They can set up little schools, little like one room schoolhouses on their own and
Yeah.
teach them. But another thing that's really important about it, because there are different homeschooling type of pods, but they have to look at the curriculum too and make sure it's Christian based curriculum. That they're
Mhm.
not just, there's some, and I won't mention any names, but there's one that's become pretty popular, but it's still a humanist based curriculum,
Yeah.
a humanly worldview, if you will, and it's not a Christian worldview curriculum. So that's the things they need to look at, because that's going to make a difference. God told us, raise them up in the way they should go, and they'll stay that way, for all of their lives. But we're not doing that. We're letting the government raise them up in the way the government wants them to go, and that's not what God commanded us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the truth. That is the truth. Um. So I guess to conclude our conversation here, what would be your advice to the parent who says, "Hey, my kids are going in the public schools to shine the light to some of their friends will never meet a Christian. My kid will be the only Christian they ever meet. So I want them to go in there and kind of basically evangelize."
That, in my opinion, that is not the role of a child. I mean, we can all be disciples of Jesus in our lives and saying things like that. But to put a child in a poisonous situation, and that's what our government schools have become. Our the governing board of the district I was on back in the day is
Mhm.
meeting tonight. And one of the discussions they're having that administration is bringing to them is to rip off the walls of the bathrooms and now
Oh
have
wow.
just open bathrooms. Now they'll have where the toilets are will be floor to ceiling walls and a private door, but basically anybody can go in anywhere. They refuse to address a policy that would say girls go in girls' room and boys go in boys' rooms, and the same for the locker rooms. The school board refused to even talk about a policy like that. I mean, can
Yeah.
you imagine how dangerous that is for your little daughters when they grow up and they get older and go to school? That we're
Yeah.
doing these things and we're convincing our children. We have schools here in Arizona, and I know they're all across the country, that the child can come in to the school, they can change their name in the school. Diane can now become Donald, and they will not tell the parents, and they will
Yeah.
make the child be addressed like that in the school. What is that going to do to a child's mind? What is it going to do to their emotions? And now with the SEI, the social emotional
Learning.
indoctrination, um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they're bringing in, we're doing it in Arizona, I'm sure they're doing it elsewhere, they're bringing in social workers to do mental evaluations. These people aren't trained to do that. They're not trained to be mental health professionals, but yet we're going to give them a certificate from the Department of Education to allow them to do these kind of things. Not a medical certificate, an educational certificate. You know, God bless those children and the parents that think their children can go in and change the tide. But they can have Satanist clubs, but you can't get anybody to run a Christian club and sponsor a Christian club in these schools.
Mm.
You know, Parents, no, don't send. Alex gives a great analogy. He talks about, what if your child was in a burning building?
Yeah.
Nobody who's supposed to save that child, the firemen, whomever, don't go into that building and don't go and do that. Would you, as a parent, stand outside and watch your child burn? I wouldn't. I would run in
No.
there and do everything I could to save my child or grandchild. And that's what people need to realize. These schools are dangerous to their children, and they've got to get them out. And
Yeah.
besides all the lack of Christian worldview they have, they're not going to teach them to read. They're not going to teach them grammar, and they're not going to teach them arithmetic. And they pick on Arizona. They say, "Oh, our schools are horrible." Well, no, the schools, ever since they brought some of this stuff in, you can look at test scores all across the nation. A majority of the kids are not learning to read, to write, and to do arithmetic.
Mm, wow. Okay, what about the conservative that would say, well, I guess the schools over there in Philadelphia are terrible, but we're over here in the country, and I know all the teachers in my school district. We basically go to the same church. My kids are okay. Our school district is different, it's not the same. What would you say to them?
People have been saying that for decades. Oh, it's those other schools over there. It's not my kid's school.
Yeah.
We've been hearing it endlessly. And it's not about the intentions of the teachers, it's about the curriculum that's being adopted in the schools. They're taking, my grandson brought home a book today from his school, and it's supposed to be an astronomy book, but it's through the English language arts. So there's very little science in it. And that's what
Mm,
Common Core was sprinkling everything else into other subjects. And no, your schools, look at the curriculum. First of all, take a and I have, like I told you, bookshelves full of books. Take a book from the turn of the century and look at what kids, when they were only going to school primarily through eighth grade, look at the
mm,
content of the curriculum in those, and look at what your children are being taught now. It's not even close. Not even close.
right.
But I think you can do a search for, I think it's the state of Kansas, from maybe the 1890s, 1880s, their eighth grade graduation test, and take a look at that, and then look at what kids are doing in school today. I mean, it
Mm,
takes about a couple of months to teach a child to read phonetically with explicit phonics, but yet we have them starting in kindergarten, and we get them through third grade and they still can't read at a grade level.
wow. That is, yeah. That is so sad to me because yet again you can see now when I asked Alex Newman the first question that I asked you, or I guess the previous question from the last, um, he said, and it makes sense that a lot of these people they were educated by the same system, therefore they uh, have to go along with the system. It makes sense to them, it's acceptable to many of them because they were themselves educated by the same system.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what I told you, kind of to bring it around to where we started. One of my epiphany moments when my daughter was just starting in school, and I'm thankful to this day, she got through third grade with explicit phonics, strong math programs, and strong grammar programs before the school district decided to implode them and took them out and went with much worse things. But I went to public schools myself. And when I saw her being taught to read with explicit phonics instructions, I realized why I hated reading, because I was not taught to read that way. I was taught to read with word memorization, look, say, they now they call it whole language. That it was just you memorize words. If you come across a word you've never seen before, you have no idea what that word is or how to read it or how to figure it out. But if you know how to sound it out, and then you sound it out and you go, oh, I do know that word, because children's vocabulary when they enter kindergarten is thousands upon thousands upon thousands of words that they know when they hear them, but they don't know how they're written or how they're spelled. So then you take that word that you're now seeing in writing and you sound it out, and it goes, oh, like arithmetic, if you sound that out and it's like, oh, I never knew how it was spelled, but I know what that word is. I know what it means. And it always made me laugh with our education system, because
yeah,
they don't want to teach children to read with explicit phonics. They want them to look at sight words, memorize the word, and commit it to memory. And there's thousands of them that a child needs to know in order to be an effective reader. But yet, think about your arithmetic tables, right? 0 to 9, 0 to 9, 100 problems, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, 400 problems that you need to memorize. Well, they want kids to memorize thousands of words by sight, but yet they won't teach them to memorize math tables because that's boring and dull. Where's the logic in that? Either kids can memorize or they can't.
yeah.
And
Makes no sense.
it's about muscle memory in your brain. You do it
Yeah,
again and again and again and again, and it stays there permanently. But not if you do it the silly ways they try to teach it.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I grew up, like I said, I grew up in Africa, and um, sometimes people are surprised that I can read almost any language with the, I guess, the common alphabet, like the one that we use in English, because I can sound the word, the letters out, and
Mm-hmm.
string them together.
Yep.
My wife is Puerto Rican, she's Hispanic, um, and she's constantly surprised that I can actually read Spanish. I don't understand it, but I can read it, and she knows what I'm saying. So, but it's because of how I was taught to read,
Mm-hmm.
which is different from, as you said, how they teach to read here. And a lot of people I meet, they don't like to read. I actually don't like to read either. I have to force myself. I have had to force myself to read, but I had the privilege in my early years of learning to read in French. So that, I guess, that helped me when we moved to an English colony that was, I would imagine, already much worse in terms of um, how they taught how to read. I was already somewhat ahead of my peers, um, but a lot of people I know, they don't like to read, and if you don't like to read, you can be easily deceived. Obviously, Alex Newman likes to point to um, uh, the old the law over there in uh,
Massachusetts.
yeah, in Massachusetts. But it makes so much sense. I saw the numbers the other maybe a few months ago about how I think it says like almost 50 something percent of I think you're saying African Americans in public school uh, cannot read at grade level. In 12th grade, they can't read past like 6th grade level, something like that. And I, I was reminded of that law in Massachusetts. I'm like, wow, this is how else will the enemy deceive people? the best way to do it is to make them not know how to read so that they're not able to find out what's going on. They're not able to read the Word of God to understand the divine revelation from God and the words that are true, the words that are powerful from the Bible. So it just makes so much sense. Yeah, thank you.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you so much, Diane, for joining me today. I have had a wonderful time talking to you. Um, Definitely would like to encourage you to keep going. I know this is can be a lonely kind of road here, um, but I think history will look back and recognize you and many others as having uh, been used by God to really sound their alarm in this area, which I believe, in my view, in my opinion, to be the most important project for the church.
Absolutely.
So I just want to encourage you with that. Um, yeah,
I thought when I left office, when I was not reelected to the superintendent's office for a second term, I
yeah,
thought, well, that's it. I'm done. You know, I'm out of education now, and God just won't let me give it up. That's why He brought me to public school exit and to Alex and my colleagues there. He just,
yeah. Yeah. I don't want God to let you go yet because I think you are important to this movement. You bring a lot of wisdom and experience. You know, it's hard to argue with someone that's actually been there, done that. You know, a lot of us, myself especially, I can speak from my room here and maybe with a few people as I go about my business, but I don't really have too much background in this field. So it's hard for me to get through to people in the ways that God will use you and has used you up to this point to present the message. Because, um, as you said, God brought you to that place to show you, and it was for a reason. So you can go back and tell others, hey, there's nothing there. We should go somewhere else. This is definitely the wrong way. So I personally am glad, and it's an honor and a privilege that I'm even talking to you right now.
well, thank you. That's very kind of you. And I hope our paths keep crossing in the future. And any questions I can ask, you know, I'm glad to because any way I can help get the message out, we need to save our children.
Yes, absolutely. I believe our paths will cross again. At least I hope, because I think God is doing something here, and um, we'll just follow God.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah. All right. I want to thank you again. Thank you so much for joining me. We have had a great conversation, but you know, we can end here now and hope maybe to pick up again in the future somehow. I'm gonna be looking for some excuses to invite you back on my podcast in the future again.
Anytime. And until that day, God bless you and your family.
Yes, ma'am. God bless you as well. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
All right. Thank you, family and friends. Thank you. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Miss Diane Douglas. Um, I am looking forward to more conversations with her because she knows what she's talking about. And if you remember, one of my commitments on this podcast was to um, engage in thoughtful conversations with experts, educators, educational activists, and practitioners who are seeking to expose the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in our pursuit to restore the church to her rightful place in education. So, Diane Douglas, E. Ray Moore, um, Alex Newman, these are the kind of people, but I also am talking to others. I talked to Don Simon, who is also has a lot of educational experience. I am talking to others such as um, my sister Ashley Hegman, who is uh, a professor in college and a therapist to teens and young adults. So I'm talking to an array of people. Anyone really that will speak to me about this subject. I don't care what your background is or what you do as your day job. If you're willing to speak to me about the subject of education and you have an input from as an expert, an educator, and an activist, or just a practitioner, someone who's passionate about this, because I am none of these things. I'm just an activist. I'm just someone who is really passionate about this subject. And I believe God has called me to say something, to dedicate some time to this subject, to try to help contribute to this counter revolution that is inevitable in our society. Because if we don't do it, some other so called conservative will do it, and they will come up with another version of secular humanism that we don't want. So we want a truly Christian counter revolution. So again, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mrs. Douglas. Please download the podcast if you're listening to this via Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Please uh, subscribe if you're listening on YouTube or Rumble. Share it, download it, comment. Let me know what you think, and find out some other ways that you can support this particular endeavor. And I will talk to you in another episode. Again, as we always say, all this is for the glory of God alone. Soli Deo Gloria. Peace out.